I'm always a night owl, so driving at night never bothers me. But something about that night was different. Maybe it was the fact that I was driving through a part of the state I didn't know anything about, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't be out there. I was on my way home after visiting some friends in a small town about 5 hours from where I lived. They'd offered for me to stay the night, but I declined, figuring I'd be fine driving home after dark. I'd done it hundreds of times before, so why not this time? The plan was just to drive until I got tired, then find a cheap motel to crash in for a few hours before finishing the drive in the morning. That's how I ended up at the Pine Creek Motel. It was a rundown, off-the-beaten-path place that looked like it hadn't been remodeled in decades. It was one of those motels you only stop at if you're desperate. There was a small office out front. The light inside was dim and the gold lettering looked like the whole place was stuck in a forgotten time. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers still gripping the steering wheel. Should I just keep driving? But the fatigue was starting to hit me hard, and I knew I couldn't handle another hour without at least a few hours of rest. Just a quick nap, I mumbled to myself, trying to block out the growing uneasiness in my stomach. I got out of the car and went into the office. The clerk was an older man with thinning hair and glasses perched on his nose. He barely spoke when I asked for a room, just handed me a key to room 6 with a curt nod, accepting only cash and quickly returning to the book he was reading. I handed him a few bills and headed to my room. It was just as run down as I'd imagined. The door was faded, the bed was saggy with a patch job, and the old TV looked like it hadn't worked in years. The air smelled damp, but to be honest, I didn't care. I was too tired to complain. All I wanted was to get a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. I went to the bathroom and splashed some water on my face. The cracked mirror was distorted and the fluorescent light above flickered constantly as I stood there letting the water run over my hands. I thought I heard something, a faint rustling sound coming from outside the window. I paused, listening, but after a few seconds it stopped. I shook my head, dismissing it as the wind or some animal moving around outside. This was an old place. Creaks and odd noises were to be expected. I turned off the water and went back to the room. I grabbed the remote and tried to turn on the TV, but after a few button presses, it was clear it was broken. Not that I was surprised. I tossed the remote aside and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, debating whether to crack open a book or just try to relax. That's when I heard it again. A soft, muffled sound, like a whisper. At first, I thought it was coming from the room next door. Maybe someone had just checked in and their voice was carrying through the thin walls. But then I pressed my ear against the wall, and I realized one thing. There was no room next door. Room 6 was at the end of the hall. Nothing but empty space on the other side of the wall. I turned around, feeling a chill run down my spine. The whisper stopped. I tried to calm myself down. I was overtired. My mind was playing tricks on me. But then the whispering started again, this time louder, closer, like it was coming from right outside the window. I jumped up, my heart pounding, and looked at the thin, faded curtains, gently moving even though there was no wind. I took a step toward the door, reaching out to pull the curtains back. The parking lot was empty, no sign of anyone. I let out a shaky breath, trying to laugh off my growing anxiety. "You're crazy," I mumbled to myself, letting the curtains fall back into place. I crawled into bed, pulled the covers up, and tried to get comfortable. But even lying there, I could hear the faintest whisper right next to my ear. Too soft to make out, but too persistent to ignore. I convinced myself there was nothing there. Maybe the wind was blowing through the old building in strange ways, or maybe there was a draft coming in from somewhere. I just needed to sleep. Everything would be fine in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. The whispering didn't stop. It got louder and louder until it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was in the room, with me. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was pitch black now. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something watching me. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, my hand shaking so badly that I almost couldn't grip the switch. The light flickered on, bathing the room in a pale yellow glow. There was no one there. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the empty room, trying to convince myself I was alone. But the feeling didn't go away. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 3 a.m. Why was it 3 a.m. already? I thought about leaving, just packing up and driving away. But I was exhausted, and what would I say? I'd already paid for the room. I couldn't explain to the clerk that I was leaving because I felt weird. He'd probably think I was crazy. So I sat there, my hand clutching my phone, waiting for the sun to come up. The whispering started again, this time clearer. It was my name. A shiver ran down my spine. I sat frozen, staring at the window, my heart pounding in my ears. It was coming from outside again. Someone out there was calling my name in a voice that didn't quite sound human. I stood up, my whole body trembling. I reached out, my hand shaking as I slowly grabbed the edge of the curtain. I pulled it back. My heart hammered in my ears. There was nothing there, just the empty parking lot bathed in the sudden harsh light of the neon motel sign. But then, as I turned away, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the light. Tall, dark, with no defining features. I stared. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I grabbed my keys and ran for the door. I didn't care what time it was. I didn't care if the clerk thought I was crazy. All I knew was that I had to get out of there. I flung the door open and sprinted across the parking lot to my car, then sped away without looking back. I didn't stop until the sun came up, the darkness far behind me. I don't know what I saw or heard that night at the Pine Creek Motel. All I know is that something was there, watching me, whispering my name. To this day, I still get goosebumps whenever I drive past an old roadside motel. I can't help but wonder if that wasn't the only place. What if whatever was out there that night is still watching me? I'm always careful when I travel alone. It's not that I'm paranoid, it's just that when you're a woman on the road, you learn to be careful. Most of the time, nothing happens. Most of the time, I'm just another traveler checking into a motel for a quick night's sleep before hitting the road in the morning. But that time was different. I was being watched, and I'm haunted by the thought that if I hadn't trusted my gut, that night might have unfolded like all my other business trips. It started like any other trip. I was on my way to a client meeting in a town a few hours away, and after a long day of driving, I decided to stop at a motel just off the highway. It wasn't the nicest place, but I wasn't expecting much. A clean bed and a lockable door would do for the night. The motel was nothing special, the kind you've probably seen thousands of times driving along deserted highways. An aging one-story building with a faded sign, gravel parking lot, and rows of rooms with peeling paint and dim, flickering lights. There were a few other cars parked outside, but the place seemed pretty deserted. I parked near the office, checked in quickly with a disinterested clerk, and got the key to room 8. I took my bag and headed to my room, trying not to think about how tired I was. I just wanted to shower, relax, and go to sleep. The room was just as I'd expected. Worn carpet, a musty smell of stale cigarettes, but it was quiet and I could lock the door. That was enough. After unpacking, I decided to grab a quick snack from the vending machine outside before settling in for the night. The parking lot was eerily quiet, but I didn't feel too uneasy, at least not yet. I was used to traveling alone, familiar with these kinds of motels. To be honest, I figured the worst I'd have to deal with was a noisy air conditioner or maybe a broken shower head. I was walking back to my room with a can of soda and a bag of chips when I saw him for the first time. He was standing a few rooms down, leaning against the wall. At first, I didn't think much of it. He could be another guest, out for a smoke or something. But as I walked past, I noticed he wasn't smoking. He was just standing there, staring. Our eyes met for a moment, and I gave him a quick, polite nod. "Hey, I see you there." He nodded back, but didn't say anything. He didn't smile or nod back, just continued to stare. A chill ran down my spine, but I convinced myself there was nothing to it. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he was weird. Maybe he didn't even notice me. I brushed it off and rushed back to my room, locking the door behind me. I spent the next hour watching TV, trying to forget about the man outside. I found myself looking out the window, expecting to see him staring back at me from the other side of the glass, but there was nothing there. Just the ugly, faded curtains gently moving in the breeze from the air conditioner. I told myself I was being ridiculous for letting my imagination get the better of me. I'd seen a guy in the parking lot. What reason did I have to think he was anyone other than another guest? But I still couldn't relax. I decided to take a bath and try to get some sleep. The hot water soothed the tension in my body, but when I stepped out and looked in the steamy mirror, I still felt a knot of unease in my stomach. I dried off, changed into my pajamas, and got into bed, turning off the TV and leaving just the bedside lamp on, dim but comforting. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the soft hum of the air conditioner or the gentle light from the lamp, my mind kept drifting back to the man, the way he stood there, silent, staring intently at me. I never saw him again, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I must have drifted off to sleep at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up to a strange sound. It was like a light tapping coming from the window. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then it came again. My heart jumped into my throat. I lay there, frozen, listening. It was coming from the window, right behind the flimsy curtain. I sat up in bed, my eyes glued to the window, trying to understand the sound. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a branch. It was deliberate. I slid out of bed and tiptoed towards the window, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the curtain. My hand was right on the fabric, and I hesitated. What if it was him? What if he was standing there, watching, waiting for me to look at him? I wanted to pull the curtain back to see for myself, but fear, overwhelming fear, kept me frozen. I stepped back from the window, my eyes glued to it as I reached for my phone. I knew deep down that something wasn't right. The unease that had followed me from the parking lot had turned into real fear, and I couldn't stop thinking that I wasn't alone. I dialed the front desk, hoping for some reassurance, but after 4 rings, no one answered. Strange, this place wasn't exactly known for its customer service. I tried again, but the tapping at the window stopped. There was a long silence, then the doorknob rattled. A wave of terror washed over me. I stumbled back, clutching my phone to my chest, slamming the door shut. The rattling continued, harder this time, as if someone was trying to see if it would open. I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body stiffened with tension. I stared at the door, waiting for it to burst open, waiting for the person on the other side to lunge in. But the door remained closed. The rattling stopped. I don't know how long I waited there, but eventually the silence returned. I crept closer to the door, pressing my ear against it, listening for any sounds from the other side. Nothing. I reached out to peek through the peephole. I had to know. I had to see if he was still out there. I peered through the tiny opening. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky sigh of relief. But just as I was starting to relax, I saw it. A shadow, flickering at the end of the hallway. He was still there, waiting for me. I stepped back from the door, my stomach tightening. He had tried to open the door once. He would try again. And next time, I might not be lucky. I grabbed my bag, stuffing my belongings inside quickly and haphazardly. My hands were trembling so hard that I could barely zip it closed, but I kept going, I didn't have time to waste. I had to get out of there. Once everything was packed, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to regain some semblance of control. I couldn't stay locked in this room forever. I needed to get to my car. I needed to leave. But that meant opening the door. My hand hovered over the knob. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew he was still out there. I'd seen the shadow, felt the weight of his presence on the other side of the door. But I couldn't stay here. I had to take my chances. I unlocked the door with a soft click, the tiny sound like a gunshot in the silence. Slowly, I cracked the door open, just enough to peek out into the empty hallway. I stepped out, every nerve in my body on high alert. The parking lot was just a few steps away. If I could make it to my car, I would be safe. But then I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. My legs carried me forward faster than I thought they could. My keys were clutched tightly in my hand. The footsteps followed behind me. I fumbled with my keys, adrenaline coursing through me as I reached my car. I flung the door open, practically diving inside, slamming it shut behind me. I threw my keys into the ignition and started the car. I looked up. He was standing at the end of the parking lot, just outside the reach of the streetlights. His face was hidden in the shadows, but I could see his silhouette. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes fixed on me. I slammed the car into gear, speeding out of the parking lot without looking back. I never reported it. What would I say? I didn't see his face. I didn't know his name. All I knew was that I was being watched. And if I hadn't left when I did, I might not be telling this story right now. I still wonder who he was. What did he want? And I will never forget the way he watched me. To be honest, I didn't plan on staying at any motels that night. I try to avoid them whenever possible. I'm not exactly a motel person, but after years of business travel, you start to get a sense of which ones are trouble, just by looking at them. But that night, I didn't have many options. I'd been driving for hours, and it was getting later than I expected. The highway was deserted, that kind of desolate where you feel like you're the last person left on Earth. I'd been trying to keep my eyes open for the past half hour and hadn't seen a rest stop in sight. I figured it was better to pull over at the next motel I saw than risk falling asleep at the wheel. When I spotted the flashing neon sign of the Evergreen Motel ahead, half of its vacancy sign burnt out underneath, I quickly veered off the highway and headed towards it. The air wasn't welcoming. Peeling paint, a few dim lights barely illuminating the parking lot, and weeds growing in patches along the cracked pavement. But like I said, I had no other choice. I parked in front of the office, which looked more like a small shed than a front desk, and stepped outside. The air hung heavy with humidity, and the place smelled of wet concrete and something rank, possibly garbage left out too long, or a nearby sewer drain. I hesitated for a second, considering turning around and driving a little further, but my body was begging for sleep and my vision was starting to blur from exhaustion. Inside the office, also unwelcoming, the clerk was a grizzled man with a thick mustache, barely looking up from the crossword puzzle he was absorbed in as I entered. He mumbled a greeting when I asked for a room for the night, without any real exchange of words. I handed him cash, no way I was letting them have my credit card information, and he slid a key across the counter without saying a word. Room 12. He grunted a thanks when I said it, although I doubt he heard me, and I walked outside. My room was at the end of the parking lot, alongside a row of doors, equally run down as the parking lot. It was deserted except for one other car, a rusty old pickup truck parked near the middle of the row, looking like it hadn't been driven in years. My door creaked when I pushed it open, and the interior was exactly what you'd expect from a motel like this. A worn carpet, faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, and the faint smell of dampness from something I couldn't quite place. The bed looked like it had seen better days, but at this point, I didn't care. I just needed sleep. I locked the door behind me, made sure it was secure, and tossed my bag down beneath the window, which had a flimsy, tattered curtain, but at least it provided some cover. I pulled it back and tried to relax. I turned on the old TV, mostly for the background noise, and lay down, staring up at the ceiling. But something felt off. I couldn't say exactly what, but the closer I got to the room, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't just the state of the room itself, but there was something else about the silence outside. It was too quiet. After about 15 minutes of tossing and turning, I sat up, wide awake. Maybe I was just stressed from the long drive. I looked out the window, expecting to find someone outside, but there was nothing, just the faint glow of the parking lot leaking through the curtain. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but then I heard the first sound, a faint scratching noise, as if something was rubbing against the outside of the door. I listened. This time it was slightly louder. I sat up straight, ears straining over the slightly distorted sound of the old TV. There was definitely something out there. My heart started to pound as I nervously looked at the door. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was the wind or some wild animal. But the more I listened, the clearer the sound became. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, like someone was trying to be quiet. I grabbed my phone and got up, walking towards the door. I hovered my hand over the knob, debating whether to check it out or not. A voice inside me was screaming at me to leave it alone, but curiosity won out. I leaned forward, peeking through the peephole. At first, I saw nothing, just the empty parking lot. But then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was standing right outside the door, slightly to the side, so I couldn't see their full figure. All I could make out was the edge of their shoulder and the glint of something shiny in their hand. Maybe a key, maybe something else. I recoiled from the door, a sick feeling rising in my stomach. This had to be someone checking the doors to see if they could get into one of the rooms undetected. I stood there, frozen, my breath catching in my throat. The scratching noises started again, followed by the muffled sound of a hand on the doorknob trying to turn it. Panic started to rise. I clutched my phone, my hands trembling. I wanted to call the front desk, but deep down, I knew it would be pointless. The old man at the desk didn't seem like the type who would care about anything that happened at this place. I considered shouting, but I wasn't even sure if anyone could hear me from inside my room. Before I could make a decision, the rattling stopped. The silence was even worse than the noise. I waited, tense, listening for any sign of movement, but the silence continued for a brief moment. I thought maybe they had left. Maybe they realized the room was locked and moved on to an easier target. But then I heard a soft tapping at the window. I whipped around, looking at the thin, painted fabric, barely concealing the shape of the window. And there it was again, a shadow moving. Someone was outside. Someone was looking at me. I stumbled back from the window. Was there someone outside my door? Someone else at the window? Or was it the same person? Finally, I dialed 911, my breath catching in my throat as I whispered into the phone. There's someone outside my room. I think they're trying to break in. The dispatcher's calm, slow voice, in complete contrast to the nightmare happening inside me, told me to stay on the line, asked for the motel's address, and assured me that the police were on their way. But as I waited, I couldn't help but feel like it wasn't enough. What if they got in before the police got here? I headed for the bathroom, locking myself inside, hoping that would buy me some time. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my ear against the glass door, listening for any sounds from outside. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. Just the silence. Then the footsteps started again. This time they were closer, right outside my window. I could hear the gravel crunching under their feet, the wood creaking as they pressed against the side of the building. They were moving around my room, checking the door and window. I clutched the phone, my hand trembling as the dispatcher continued to talk to me, asking if I was okay. I could still hear them, but all I could do was listen. Finally, I heard a faint rustling sound in the distance. The footsteps stopped. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sign that they were still out there. But there was nothing. No scratching, no tapping, no footsteps. Just silence. As I cautiously stepped out of the bathroom and opened the door, they were gone. The police searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. No footprints, no signs of a break-in, nothing to explain what happened. The motel clerk didn't see anything either. Probably just kids, he said with a shrug, like he was dismissing the whole thing. But I knew better. Someone was outside my room. Someone was trying to break in, and they were there to rob me, or worse. I have no doubt that if I hadn't called 911 when I did, I might not have made it through the night. So I don't stay at motels anymore. It's not a long drive, just a weekend trip, something to break up the monotony of work, to give me and my girlfriend Rachel a chance to unwind. We didn't really have a destination in mind, just a general direction, and a plan to stop wherever we felt like it. That spontaneous decision to just drive and see where the road took us is what led us to the Evergreen Motel. I'll never forget the name, even though I wish I could. If I knew what was waiting for us there, I would have kept driving. I would have kept going, no matter how tired we were. It was already late when we pulled off the highway sometime after midnight. Our original plan was to camp out somewhere, but we realized we hadn't brought half the gear we needed. The sun had already set hours ago, and after a stretch of deserted road with no signs of life, we spotted the neon sign of the Evergreen Motel. It looked strange, faded, but not in a creepy, dilapidated way, just old, time-worn. "It looks okay," Rachel said, yawning, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I'm too tired to be picky," I agreed, feeling the weight of exhaustion pulling at me. So we drove into the gravel parking lot, our headlights illuminating a few other cars scattered throughout. It wasn't empty, but it wasn't crowded either. Just enough life to feel comfortable, not like we were the only ones there. The motel itself was a one-story structure with about a dozen rooms, each with a door facing the parking lot. Not exactly welcoming, but not the worst place I'd been either. Inside the office, the clerk was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a weary look. He handed me a key to room 7, barely speaking. I remember thinking he looked like someone who'd been stuck there too long. We walked to our room. It was quiet despite the other cars in the lot. It didn't feel like anyone else was around. No TVs playing from other rooms, no muffled voices. Just the distant hum of the neon sign and the faint buzz of insects in the summer night air. As I opened the door to the room, the first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't strong, but it was definitely there. A kind of musty, stale air, like the place had been closed up for too long. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean enough at first glance. Everything seemed okay. I dropped my bag. I was too tired to care about peeling wallpaper or flickering bathroom lights. After a quick shower, we both collapsed, exhausted from a long day of driving. For a while, we just lay there, listening to the low murmur of the TV, the kind of mindless background noise that helps you relax. "Maybe we'll find a nicer place to stay tomorrow," Rachel mumbled, her head resting on my shoulder. "Yeah, tomorrow," I agreed. But at that moment, I didn't care about tomorrow. All I wanted was to sleep, but it didn't last. I woke up to a creaking sound. At first, I thought it was the bed, or maybe Rachel shifting next to me, but the sound continued like slow footsteps moving across the carpet. My mind was clouded with sleep, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. A strange, unsettling feeling crawled up my spine. Something wasn't right. "Rachel," I whispered. The quiet sound had stopped. I turned my head to look at Rachel, expecting to see her sleeping beside me, but my eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light from the window. That's when I saw him, the clerk. He was standing over her, sleeping form, his face just inches from Rachel's. His greasy hair fell down over his forehead as he leaned closer, His lips parted for a moment. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, but then I realized he was trying to kiss her. Rage and terror flooded me simultaneously. I sat up, flinging the blanket off of myself. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled, my voice cracking with panic. Rachel jolted awake, her eyes wide with confusion. As she woke, she instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around herself. The clerk stumbled backward, his face contorted in something that looked like embarrassed shame. But there was something dark behind it, something calculating. He didn't say anything. He just stared between me and Rachel, and for a moment, I thought I was going to throw up. I screamed again, my voice filled with more anger than fear now. The clerk blinked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he started to move toward the door, but he wasn't quick enough. He lingered for another second, his gaze fixed on Rachel before finally turning and shuffling out of the room. I slammed the door shut, my hand trembling as I locked it. I was still shaking, adrenaline pumping through me. What just happened? What was he doing in our room? Rachel sat up in bed, her face pale as she looked at the door. "What the hell?" she whispered. "I don't know," I mumbled, still trying to process what had just happened. He was here. I don't know how, but he was here. "He was so close," Rachel said, as if she could still feel his presence. The thought made my skin crawl. I paced around the room, trying to figure out what to do. Should I call the police? Should we leave? But where would we go in the middle of the night like this? The nearest town was miles away, and we didn't know anyone around here. And what if the clerk was still out there, watching us? I walked over to the window, cautiously pulling the curtain back just enough to look out. The parking lot was empty except for our car and the clerk's beat-up pickup truck near the office. But there was no sign of him. "We need to leave," Rachel said suddenly, her voice sharp. "I don't care where we go, but we can't stay here." I nodded. She was right. We couldn't stay. I grabbed our bags, stuffing everything inside as quickly as I could. Rachel had already gotten out of bed, getting dressed with shaking hands. I kept looking toward the door, expecting it to open again, expecting to see the clerk standing there with his twisted, predatory smile. As soon as we were packed, we bolted. We didn't just walk, we ran to the car. We practically sprinted across the parking lot. I unlocked the door and jumped inside. Rachel was pale and shaken, her hands trembling. "Just go," she said. I started the car and we sped out of the parking lot. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if he was standing in the doorway watching us leave. We drove for miles in silence. The road stretched out before us, dark and empty. The only sound was the soothing hum of the engine. My mind raced, replaying the events of the night over and over, trying to make sense of it. What was he doing? Finally, Rachel broke the silence, her voice a whisper. "Why was he in our room?" "I don't know," I said, "but he wasn't supposed to be there. We just need to forget this ever happened." We never talked about it much after that. We didn't tell anyone. When we got home, it was like there was an unspoken agreement between us. We wouldn't bring it up. We wouldn't think about it. But it stayed with me. It lingered in the back of my mind. To this day, I can't stay in motels. I can't shake the memory of waking up to see that man leaning over Rachel. His lips were too close to her face. I can't forget the way he looked at her, as if he was about to do something terrible, something I was only seconds away from stopping. And I'll never forget the way he looked at her as he left. It was like he wasn't finished, like he was going to come back. If these stories scare you, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying tales that will keep you up at night. Have you had a scary experience of your own? Drop it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a spooky story. Stay safe, and remember, some dreams are real. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare. Thank you for watching today's story. I hope these chilling experiences have made you reflect on fears and trust in life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on more engaging stories and interesting content in the future. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.